Everybody, welcome to week 10 of the Edge Breakdown. I am here with the world famous MJohnson, and we're going to be talking about 4 games this week. The first one you'll see up on the screen if you're watching this stream on YouTube versus listening to podcasts. We have the Vikings and the Bills up, which we know is in a blanket of uncertainty right now. We're also going to discuss the Cowboys and the Packers, the Cardinals and the Rams, and the Colts versus the Raiders. With that being said, please welcome Mr. Johnson into the podcast. And we're going to lead off with the Vikings and Bills and all the uncertainty that surrounds this because of Mr. Allen.
Yeah, definitely an interesting game, a game that if it wasn't for Allen's injury, this would be the most interesting game on the slate by far, and it'd probably have like a 8-point higher total. So yeah, there's a lot of question marks around it. Personally, I don't think Allen will play. The UCL injury, you can play through it, but the Bills have Super Bowl aspirations, and with the sprain or whatever he's dealing with, if he were to get hit like that again, he would almost certainly tear it completely, and then he'd need Tommy John surgery and be done for the year. So just from a practicality standpoint, they've got 2 games after this that are very winnable. They've got 2 home games, and then I think they play the Lions. So I think like if he were to miss 2 or 3 weeks, that would be pretty reasonable. And Case Keenum's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. His style's obviously different than Josh Allen. He's not going to run for 80 yards or anything, but more than serviceable. And with the roster they have, they can win games without Allen and kind of keep afloat here.
Yeah, when it happened, I told everybody in our Discord, I'm like, that's UCL all the way. It was the way he grabbed his elbow instantly, because he grabbed it like a pitcher grabs it. When it goes, if you go watch the highlights back, you can just see the instant he grabbed. I was like, oh no, right? Because he had all that generating force behind him, right? And he's such a big, strong guy.
Well, yeah, and if you saw the sequence of plays, everyone, I've heard a lot of people talk about the 2 or 3 plays later, he threw the bomb to Gabe Davis where he chucked it down the field and it flew like 65 yards or something. He's got to be fine. But the reality is that's just throwing it up there. If you look at the play before that, he tried to hit Diggs on it was 15 yards down the field, and Diggs was open right at the first down marker. And it was just he skipped it to him, hit it off his feet. So the injury, he still can chuck it. He still has the strength, but he's got basically no control over it. He just threw that one way down the field to Davis. I don't see any way he's going to be able to play an NFL game this week and put the ball where he needs to put it.
If I'm the Bills also, you started off with it great, right? This is a long-term aspiration team right now, and this season especially included. Get through the next 3 or 4 games, give him some time off, let his arm heal, hopefully avoid surgery, and get him back there, right? There's no need to push it if I'm them, in my opinion. While this is a huge matchup with the Vikings and a game everybody was super excited about last week, thinking about coming into this week, I think there is a good opportunity with how this lines up for them to do well and go from there. So that being said, we're probably going to see some ownership drop significantly on this game, especially on the Bill side, if it is case. How do you see yourself wanting to attack the Buffalo side if that's the case?
So I do not see, like I said, I think Keenum is probably better than 10 starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And he's a solid player. He was very good in his time in Minnesota, and they brought him in specifically, and he chose to be there specifically because, quarterback's the most important position in sports. And for a team like them to have a strong backup, it's a very valuable thing. I think that what's interesting is the Bills really aren't built to be a heavy running team. They sure will probably run it more with their running backs will see the ball more, but like Allen used to run the ball. He usually runs the ball, 7 to 10 times a game anyways. So I think that those runs just become running back runs. And I don't necessarily think that the Bills passing volume will take as big of a hit as a lot of people think, because they're still built to throw. They've still got a ton of weapons. This isn't a matchup that you want to avoid or that would be super scary. And I'm guessing that most people's reaction will be backup quarterback. Vikings are near min price, and they're going to be super popular as a defense. So yeah, I think that the Bills receiving options are pretty interesting this week. Isaiah McKenzie and Dawson Knox could be guys who Allen pushes the ball down the field so much. Keenum might pepper them with more underneath type targets. Diggs, obviously Keenum has played with the Vikings or played with Diggs on the Vikings in the past, so they've got to have some chemistry. So I think those are all interesting spots to kind of think about and look at. And again, this Vikings defense, they've had a pretty cupcake schedule, but they haven't been world beaters by any means.
And with that, one of the interesting pickups they made was with Hines. And you talked about those runs. I could see that also getting split up where there's more screen passes, there's more checkdowns, right? Case is going to check the ball down a lot more than Allen, right? Allen's just going to take off and run and get up and laugh in your face when he runs you over because he's a lunatic.
Yeah.
Right? Case is not that quarterback. So I can definitely see some unique ways to stack it on that side of the ball where there's going to be just almost zero ownership on something like that.
Yep.
On the other side, you just talked about it, right? Min-priced Vikings against the strength of the Buffalo D. How do you see yourself trying to get exposure here in this game?
So, that's the thing that's kind of tough for me is the Minnesota side, really, and how things get affected. It's interesting as I was researching this game, the Bills defense, they have such a strong perception, and they've been a very good defense on the whole this year. But if you look at the last 2 weeks, they've given up 191 rushing yards per game. And that's to the Jets and the Packers, who are teams that want to run the ball and who aren't particularly efficient on the whole. So I think Dalvin Cook's kind of interesting. I think he's a little too pricey on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, I think at 7,500, he's in a really good spot here. The Bills are also likely to be without Tremaine Edmonds, hasn't practiced this week. Jordan Poyer, their starting safety. Edmonds is their starting middle linebacker. And they also have one of their defensive ends has not practiced yet this week. So just a very interesting spot there, I think. TJ Hawkinson joining the Vikings last week. He played like the best. He had a ton of design targets. He played over 90% of the snaps. Just a very interesting spot for him this week. And, I'm a little – Justin Jefferson is not a guy I'm necessarily chasing or Kirk Cousins. I do think that the Buffalo secondary is legit and they don't have to bring a ton of pressure. So I don't know that Jefferson's likely to hit a ceiling game, and Cousins just isn't really my type of quarterback anyways. But I think Hawkinson and Cook specifically on FanDuel are really interesting.
So if you're watching on the stream right now on YouTube, Mike, when he's working from his office, has motion sensor lights. So right now he looks like Darth Vader. He went all black on us. So I didn't want to interrupt him on his monologue. So that little bit of noise there, you hear him getting up and moving around so we could see his pretty face again.
All right, we're back.
Yeah. So I just was telling everybody we can see her pretty face again on the stream here. So. So yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting way to get exposure to this game, and obviously, Allen's going to totally affect ownership and which way they go. I will be shocked if they play him, but as someone that has a bunch of them, I want him to play from a selfish standpoint. If I own the Bills and I'm the GM and the coach, I don't play him because I'm trying to win the Super Bowl this year. So that's the direction I'm going there. So now we're going to move on to what I think is one of the most interesting games on the slate this week because of all the stuff that happened, the spot they're in. It's just a unique matchup, and that's the Colts and Raiders. Obviously, we have the Jeff Saturday hiring, his great, opening speech he gave where everybody loved hearing from him. He got all the Ted Lasso references like, hey, I want to go play for this guy and let's see how it goes. Irsay, we never know what he's going to do. That being said, I think this game has the ability to come in at really low ownership. And Jacobs is coming off 2 dud games against the strength of what the Colts is, which is their run D. Do you see yourself, if he comes in sub 5% ownership, mixing him in and trying to take advantage of that with him in a spot for a bounce back game?
Well, I mean, I think he's going to be around 20% owned. He's just his volume in the state of the running back position this week, kind of in a spot where I just don't think he's going to be super popular, or I think he's going to be more popular. Really, on the Raiders side, I have a ton of interest in Davante Adams. So if you look at Davante Adams' last 5 games, so we have the one really bad dud everybody remembers against the Saints where he caught just 1 pass. But he was very sick that week. It clearly affected his play. The whole Raiders offense just was a nightmare. So if you look at his other 4 games, if you look at his other 4 games, so if we just forget about that game and we just wipe it from the slate, the other 4 games, he's averaging 7.5 receptions, 117 yards, and a touchdown over his last 4 games. That's 28 DraftKings points and 21 FanDuel points. And that's an average. So now you've got Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller on IR. Renfrow being gone means Adams gets moved to the slot more. Adams just called out the Raiders coaches for basically going away from what's working, and he's correct. He had 9 catches for 145 yards and 2 touchdowns last week in the first half. And then he caught 1 ball in the second half. He got a bunch of targets late when they were just throwing it up deep when they were trying. We could very easily see the Davante Adams movable chess piece, centerpiece of the offense that we got to know and love in Green Bay. I think that's what we could be in store for coming up on this little stretch for the next few weeks for the Raiders. So Adams is a really interesting piece. And you talked about the Colts, the strength of their run defense. So I think Adams is going to be what has to move the ball for the Raiders.
Totally agree. I'm all over Adams this week. You gave the best example. When they were using them, they looked well, and the Colts pass D is not their strength. No Renfrow, no Waller. I could see Mac Hollins being an interesting stack here if you're going to double stack it with them. I think that's a great way to get some exposure to this with a Cook bring back. And this is one of those games, I think the Colts are going to come out fired up with Jeff and the new coach and try to make a statement. And I think this game, while it's projected only at 41 and the range of outcomes and ceiling things that we're looking for, you could see this going 34-27, 34-24. And if you have the right exposure there, it'll be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And afternoon only, especially. What's that?
I said,
Taylor, yeah. I knew what you meant. And I think Taylor's going to he's fully practicing. I think he's going to get a healthy dose of touches. And this Raiders defense, their pass D has been kind of the worst aspect of their defense, but they're just not good altogether. The Colts are going to lean on the run. And I just think that Taylor's going to see a lot of volume, and he can certainly bust some big plays against the poor defense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this stacks out and where it goes from there. Moving on to our next game, we're going to talk about the Cowboys and the Packers. I'm really interested in this game as well, for probably not the way everybody wants to play this. I think we're going to see the Cowboys run the ball. I think it's pretty clear. I think the Packers run D has shown who they are, and that is absolute garbage. And the Packers not having a wide receiver, again, has just shown how much it hurts them, especially after hearing how hard they tried to trade at the deadline for a couple of them. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys total? How do you get exposure there? And how do you see the Zeke Pollard position working out?
So it's interesting. This is like one of my favorite spots for tournaments to look at this week, because Packers run defense has been so bad. And 2 weeks ago before the bye, Zeke was out and Pollard was, the most popular running back on the slate, and he smashed the Bears for 150 total yards and 3 touchdowns, which was great. And then people think, okay, Zeke's back, that's going to hurt Pollard. But the reality is that Pollard was averaging 12.5 touches per game prior to week 8. And in week 8, he had 15 touches. So it didn't really change his role. He still only played 53% of the snaps. And it's a very similar matchup as far as he's playing a very bad run defense. They're projected for just over 24 points. And the reality is that Zeke has looked better this year than he did last year. Last year, it was because he was battling a PCL injury. Well, now he's back. They say he's going to be wearing this big knee brace, and they're not sure. He's not full strength. So, this is the slow, hobbled, fullback-looking Zeke that we saw in the past. And the Cowboys front office and coaches have been saying all the right things about Zeke. But the reality is that Pollard is a much better player at this point. When the chips are down, if Zeke has 10 runs for 25 yards, are they really going to just keep giving him the ball? So I think that Pollard, he's going to be 1% owned, and he's basically in the same spot that he was in when he was 50% owned. So I think he's there's not much better GPP play that you're going to find in Week 10 NFL.
On that side of the ball, how do you think that fares for Dak, CD, and their other pass catchers?
So I think that CeeDee Lamb has obviously got a great role. He's their number one receiver, but he really hasn't shown a ceiling this year, and he's priced pretty highly. So Michael Gallup played 84% of the snaps in their last game before the bye, and he had a bye. So coming off that knee injury, I think he's a full-time player, and he's going to be a fraction of the ownership and significant salary savings off of Lamb. So I like him and Dalton Schultz as the pass catchers in this game. Schultz is priced way below where he should be with Dak under center. He was the tight end 3 in 2021 with Dak under center, and then this year he battled injuries. Dak was out for a while, but he had caught 6 for 74 right before the bye, and I think he's going to have some big games in these next 2 or 3 weeks. So those are the guys I would like. On DraftKings specifically, Dak isn't someone I'm really targeting because he's priced right next to Tua and Justin Fields, who I just think there's a much greater chance that those guys have a monster ceiling type game. But on FanDuel, I really like Dak, and the pass catchers I like on both sites are Gallup and Schultz.
So will you have, with all the questions, regarding Kelsey or to not Kelsey again this week? I just talked about it with Hilo. The answer is always to Kelsey, but we're not going to have 100% ownership here. Can you see yourself for leverage of this just running Schultz without Dak, especially on DK then?
Yeah, Schultz will be in my player grid this week. He's one of the top tight end options in my opinion. He's on a team that's a favorite, that's going to be efficient, that's in a good matchup against a defense that's hobbled. So yeah, he's a guy that at sub 4K, it's going to be really hard not to throw in. And even if Kelsey has a 30-point game, I think 15 to 20 from Schultz is very viable. And given that he's less than half the price, I actually lean Schultz there.
Good to hear. What about the other side of the ball and the hot mess that is the Green Bay Packers?
Well, yeah, the Packers obviously have gotten a lot of press for not great reasons recently, and they're continuing to struggle. The backfield is no for me. The Cowboys have been easier to beat on the ground, but Aaron Jones left last week with an injury. Then when the sites made their pricing for the week, they were worried Jones would be out, so they priced A.J. Dillon way up. So now it's a situation where Jones is hobbled and Dillon is priced way too high for, a number 2 running back. So I won't play either of them. Rodgers, done with him. But Allen Lazard is pretty interesting to me. He's averaged, I think it's like 8.5 targets over his last 4 fully healthy games. And, now with Romeo Doubs set to miss time and nobody else really that Rodgers can consistently trust, Lazard is very interesting to me, especially if this game plays out kind of how I expect it to, with the Cowboys running game being able to get out to a big lead. I'll be kind of surprised if Lazard doesn't see 8 to 10 targets again this week. And the Cowboys pass defense is very good, but the one thing that they do is their secondary will take a lot of chances, and they are very beatable. Lazard's trusted in the red zone. He can make contested catches. So he's a really interesting piece for me. And he's fine. He's going to play. He's got like this shoulder injury, but so he's got this Q next to his name, but he'll be fine. That'll just serve to keep his ownership in check. So I like him as like a correlation piece with Pollard.
Interesting. That's it's a good way to look at that. And I think there's definitely going to be some upside, and especially too, also with, you talked about Schultz. If you're getting at 4,000, the doors it's going to open up with saving all that salary is quite unique to see. As we finish up
Absolutely.
here and we move on to the last game here that we're going to talk about, the Cards and the Rams. When we started this season, this is one I had circled on the calendar. I thought we'd get to week 10. This could be an insane shootout. The total's going to be 55. Here we are in week 10. It's got an over-under of 40.5. And it's just a dumpster fire going down the road inside another dumpster fire for both sides of the ball.
Yeah, it's not pretty. Stafford got put in a concussion protocol. I don't really think he plays this week, just because of how it went down. He hasn't practiced this. We're recording this Friday around noon. He hasn't practiced yet this week. We'll see if he practices today, but he finished the game Sunday, and then the symptoms showed up a day or two later. So just the way the timing of it works, it'd be shocking if he practices today. It'd be really shocking if he got cleared for Sunday. So now you got a Rams offense that has scored 20 points once in the last, they've scored over 20 points twice all season and only once in their last 6 games. So, they're struggling with Stafford. You put in his back up, it's going to be tough sledding. And the Ravens defense is solid, and Kyler Murray's got a hamstring injury. So kind of on both sides, it's just, there's not a lot to like. The one guy that there's 2 situations for DFS that I find interesting. One is Rondale Moore, who in 4 of his last 5 games has seen 8 or more targets. The Rams play a zone-heavy scheme, and I could see Moore getting a lot of targets, especially if Kyler plays and he's got his hamstring issue. A lot of underneath stuff to Moore, and he's got the talent and ability to break tackles and make some big plays. So he's really interesting to me. And then the Rams defense, the Cardinals defense as well. Obviously, both defenses, if we think the offenses are going to struggle, the defenses are interesting. But the Cardinals should be fairly popular, and the Rams defense is very good, and they're at home, and they provide great leverage, at maybe less than a quarter of the ownership that the Cardinals defense will have.
That was the thing that stood out to me so far when looking at that was the Rams D and getting leverage off of this game, especially if Kyler plays. We're going to see those Rondale, Nuke and Kyler stacks if he does play. In my opinion, I don't think it'll be major chalk, but we'll definitely see some more. And I think a cool way to leverage off. It's there. Like I said, I'm sad that this is where the state of these two teams are right now. I thought this would be a much more fun game even weeks ago, even 3 or 4 weeks ago. This had, hey, Hop is going to come back. The Rams are going to figure this out. And then, here we are. And when we start talking about player pool and exposure, it's there. So I don't think there's much more to talk about here. But what I would like to get out of you, Mike, is what other games are you targeting? What's your ideal environments this week? And how do you see getting some leverage on the field?
Yeah, so I think the Bears-Lions game is very interesting. Obviously, we saw what Fields did last week, and it'll be popular. But the Bears, they've had 2 straight weeks now. The Dolphins game and the they played it before that. Oh, the Cowboys game. We were just talking about the Cowboys. Those 2 games where over 60 points scored in both games, and now you got the Lions, who they've been in their share of shootouts this year, and they've got Swift is in a weird role. I wouldn't play Swift, but it's an interesting, just his presence, him getting even 5 to 8 touches helps the offense as a whole. So yeah, I like the idea of with Fields playing Chase Claypool, who in a short week just joining the team, he got schemed a lot of targets. He didn't see a ton of snaps, but I think they tried to get him the ball like 6 times. And obviously they value him a lot. They traded a 2nd-round pick for him. So I think Fields and Claypool is an interesting pairing. And then you can full game stack that with like Jamal Williams and St. Brown from the other side. Williams, he's got 4 games with multiple touchdowns this season. Really like him. Just it looks like they're going to keep just using Swift sparingly, so that gives Williams a good shot at 20-plus touches. And St. Brown saw like 31% of the targets last week, and his price still is very, very easy to get to. So kind of that 4-player block I've been building a lot of rosters around. And then the Dolphins, I think you just have to have some Dolphins rosters every week at this point. They're just too concentrated and explosive at home against the Browns defense that's been torched at times this year. Those are the 2 game environments that stick out to me the most.
Yeah, Minnesota, the Dolphins have turned into our Minnesota rule. It's just at this point, you have to play them. If you don't, you're probably not going to break the slate. There's so much concentration there. Hilo and I just talked about that. And I do want to ask as we end up here, I was able to get onto the Jets D last week, and very glad I did. It opened up a ton of stuff. While it wasn't, crazy monster scores, it, with the way that game played out, it helped me get some leverage. If I would have had some Mixon, I would have had some big days. But Mixon's in I just don't care at this point, right? We knew he'd have 1 of these games this year, maybe 2, and he got it. And Chase being out definitely opened that door for them. Were you able to get there? And what other defense for you this week really do you see coming into this week gives you some leverage opportunity?
Yeah, I used a little bit of the Jets. They weren't like a priority piece for me, but yeah, I mean at min price, and they're a solid defense. Yeah, I used some of them. Had a couple of good lineups. Finished 10th in the flea flicker. Had 2 lineups in the top 30, I believe. So I had some sweats there with Fields and Mixon and Adams. But yeah, I mentioned the Rams defense before. I also think that the Bills defense is interesting. Just direct leverage off the Vikings. You know, Allen being in or out doesn't change the fact that Cousins has laid some big eggs against good defenses in big spots. So I think the Bills defense is really interesting there. I also think the Browns defense, if you look at what, the last 2 weeks, the Bengals, part of the reason that it was hard to get on Mixon or the Bengals offense was they looked so bad that Monday night against the Browns. And the Browns defense has had a bad, they haven't been good on paper. They're not very good for the season, but they're pretty healthy now. They're coming off their bye, and they just made the Bengals look terrible on primetime. So they're priced, right near the bottom, and they're playing what'll be a pretty popular. We just talked about Miami and that game environment. But if Miami's throwing the ball a lot, that's a lot of chances for sacks and turnovers. The one weakness the Dolphins have is their offensive line. So Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney could wreak some havoc. And at defense, again, especially when you're at those lower ends, the Dolphins could score 30 points and the Browns D could still have, 12 to 15 fantasy points.
I could definitely see that happen. And I'm going to, in my 3 max, those are the few I'm for sure going to be targeting. Well, as we're ending up here, you can see Mr. Mike has gone dark on us again if you're watching the stream on YouTube. So we'll say, as you can see the shadow of the man there. Thanks for tuning in this week. Don't forget, you can come over to our Discord. We have props going on both NBA and NFL. We also, I do quite a bit of college basketball. We've been doing some college basketball so far, and we're excited to see where this goes. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.